Phil, my old buddy, old pal. I said to Phil said the only reason he would do it is if I put an Anfield background behind me, and it wouldn't work. So
No,
I
chicken
had,
down.
yeah, I had to lure him in somehow. So Phil, I guess like I've known you for a long time. You've been a real good pal and mentor of mine, and I've been trying to use this period of time to kind of sit and reflect and talk to people that I know I always learn from, and you're one of those people. So I appreciate you like affording me
Pleasure.
a little portion of your time. When you think like over the last number of years, and I'm sure this has like been the most extended break you've had, no more than the rest of us, and I'm sure you've had some plenty of alone time sitting back thinking about like some of the best performances you've seen from either players you work with or players that you've been around. Is there any common themes coming up in the kind of things that are going through your head at the minute, or is it all very different and there's not much connections, or where are you at with that?
What in what way? What do you mean?
Like, I suppose when you look back at all the, like, you know, you've been there, like, you've seen some amazing performances, you've seen your guys come on and win tournaments and stuff like that, and you think back to what leads to those big days and what goes into them. Is there any, when you do a deep dive in your reflections, is there any common trends you see that you can think back of, or is it just different from week to week, or what's your thoughts there?
It's hard. It's hard really to see common trends, because if you did, you'd be able to predict, wouldn't you, when big weeks would come in? And I think that's hard to, you know, I mean, I've been with players and, you know, like, and they've won tournaments at any specific week, and you think, well, I didn't see that coming. But I think, like, generally it's about the body of work that you put in that gives you the best chance on any given week to, you know, put in that performance of your life, isn't it? And it could be, you know, certain things that's happened that week, which half the time are out on the golf course, you have no control over. It's how that player's reacting or executing the shots that week, isn't it? It's up to them. So no, I mean, it's hard to predict, but I think generally, like, you put a good body of work in, and every now and then the stars will align for you. Yeah. You'll do the right thing at the right moment, execute the right shot at the right time, it snowballs, and then, you know, that week you've won, or whether it's a regular tournament, major, or perform well at a key match, Ryder Cup, or key tournament towards the end of the year to win an Order of Merit, it works itself out. But God, if you could predict, you know, highlight certain trends and then be able to predict, you know, I'd be on better.
It's kind of funny though how it works. Like, it does, you know, I suppose there's a certain body of work, and obviously performance like seems to be fairly cyclical, and it goes up and it goes down, and some waves last a little bit longer than others, and you probably never do know. You never know when it's maybe going to go up, but you never really know when it's going to come down either. But it's true, like, I suppose you've had such a unique position where, like, well, not unique, I guess, but, you know, you have a body of work long enough now where you've seen, you know, kind of careers come up and come down and come back up again. Is there anything in the guys that you've seen stretch out that way the longest that you can think of, or has it been different with different guys?
I think, yeah, I mean, I've been around a lot of different players over a period of time, and you see sort of peaks and troughs, and it's hard to predict those coming, but you see guys who bounce back, or there's an ebb and flow, isn't there? But I think, like, longevity, enthusiasm for the game, you know, if you don't have that, it's hard to bounce back from the troughs, isn't it? So yeah. Enthusiasm for the game, to love the game, and, you know, and obviously things like work ethic and stuff like that. I mean, most of the guys have, you know, good work ethics, but obviously you've got to work smart, so you've got to have the right information, apply yourself the right way. But if you don't have the enthusiasm for the game and that sort of, you know, grittiness as well, I think it's hard to have a sustained career over a long period of time, because I think like professional golf is a lot harder than what people think from a off the golf course. You know, the knocks that you take off the course, and you know everything, the energy required and the focus required to, you know, in and around a career. It's tough. You know, they travel a lot. They spend a lot of time away from family. So I think there's lots of factors off the golf course which contribute. You know, like even like family life, things like that, how secure that is around the player and stuff. I think you've got good family life, good support network, and you have like a real enthusiasm and passion for the game, then that gives you a foundation, doesn't it, to have a lengthy career. Now, if you work hard and work smart and you get lucky along the way, then you'll be okay.
It's funny that too. It's like it's a piece of it that, you know, if you love the game for what the game gives back to you, it can be quite tough, because when it stops giving you that back, it's hard to kind of motivate yourself to get back on it. But if you love the game and what the game gives you along the way is like a byproduct, it's a little bit easier maybe to deal with some of the tough times that come along the way as well.
Yeah.
What about like you yourself? Obviously, you've committed yourself to a life of like working with in high performance sport, and like, you know, that's what we all love, that whole, like, being at the very front edge of the sport that we work in. But you obviously have to make quite a few sacrifices yourself. You're on the road quite a bit, and like you're out there week in, week out as much as anyone. Like, what is it that sustains you? Like, I'm sure I've just got to be a couple of weeks where you're pulling those Odyssey bags. Like, and I know we're in quarantine right now, and you're like, I give anything to be back there. But what is it that sustains you over this period of time to like put in the hours and keep?
I think it's similar, really. I mean, I've always enjoyed golf. Like, golf's a massive passion of mine. When I was a kid, I wanted to play. It was never good enough. I was always interested in, you know, performance and coaching, trying to get better myself. I was really into psychology. When I got to that level where I decided wanted to be like an elite player, I was really into like the psychology of the game and stuff like that. So I was always looking at ways from a, like, I guess, like sports science of how you could get better. Did it at uni. So I was big into that. Went and played, wasn't very good. What can I do now? Well, I'll coach, you know, because I like it and I've got something to offer maybe there, and I want to be in the game still. I wanted to be involved in golf and a practicing player. I didn't see anything, whatever it would have been. If it had been a chef at a golf club, I would have been, you know, just to be in and around golf. So it's like that aspect. And I think, like, you know, when I set out, I was just coaching, and I was obviously very lucky that I had a mentor in Harold Swash. So, you know, I from being specific by specializing, I was lucky. I could go into something specific like putting instruction. You know, there's a role for me with Harold. But then, although it was a specialist role, I never envisaged doing what I do now. You know, I never envisaged sort of traveling to tournaments, you know, predominantly looking after like an elite level of player. I just felt like, well, yeah, I could end up teaching good players, and that would give me credibility, and I might be able to charge a bit more for my hourly lesson. I just enjoyed coaching, you know, and learning more about the craft and learning more about, you know, what putting in entailed, and learning more about, you know, teaching people better, coaching people better. And then it just kind of like spiraled, really, didn't it? And I think that the passion's always been there, just about coaching, trying to be better myself, helping people. And then I think when you get in an environment like an elite level environment, it becomes quite addictive in a way, because if you're in and around people and you see them do well and they're winning tournaments and you feel part of it, it's a massive buzz, you know, a buzz that you never were going to get yourself as a player, but you get it you know, secondhand as a coach, don't you? So there's always like, and you get also that enjoyment of seeing someone else achieve a dream and a goal. So that element kind of drives you, doesn't it? I mean, that's one facet. But I wouldn't necessarily say that's the sole driver, just because like being at a tournament and stuff. But I think what drives me is being as good as I can be as a coach, and obviously like your player is just a reflection of that. Like if I learn more, if I apply myself better, then hopefully that player is going to improve. So I guess, you know, there's that aspect which drives you to keep going forward and, you know, be that third week away from home rather than 2 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of sort of driving forces, really. And then there's also the element where you're stuck in it, you know?
Yeah,
so it's, you know, you're on the treadmill, aren't you? And I guess it's like, you know, periods like this that when you're not doing it and it's like you have a little bit of time to reflect and you might even ask yourself, why am I doing this? You know, or you know what, I could do this better or do this differently. But I you know, I have a choice. I have a choice ultimately of what I want to do. And this period of time has definitely helped me realize that. It makes you realize that, you know, like financially, you know, what's important, you know, money, family, health. And then it makes you realize actually you have a choice in what you do. Everything is a choice, isn't it? But, you know, I still go back teaching. You know, I'd like to maybe do a little bit less, and maybe that's my choice. If I could travel a little bit less, so I can spend more time at home with the family. I'd also like to play a little bit more golf myself now. I actually genuinely miss playing the game now.
Yeah.
But no, I love coaching, and I love being in the thick of it and testing yourself. So yeah,
And that's
rambling now.
Yeah, it's brilliant because like that's you know, that's what it comes down to, like, as well. It's lovely to hear come from you too, is that you know, it is in the, like, you know, it is in the thick of it, and it's not always comfortable in the thick of it either. You know, I don't think it's comfortable. Like sometimes, like, you have to have hard conversations, and you don't know whether you say the right thing, and there's a lot of introspection and stuff.
I love a bit of that though. I love it when it gets a little bit. Sometimes you might have to say something that could upset someone, but you're passionate that's what. I don't mind a little bit of that, and I've also found, you know, like, you know, players don't mind a little bit of that either. You know, and sometimes conflict can be good because a direction comes from it.
Yeah.
You know, so.
And that's that was definitely something I wanted to chat about. Is like, I suppose, and I've come full circle with this too, to a large degree. Is like when you start coming up coaching, and like, you know, you get fortunate. You know, some good player decides that, you know, you can add some value in terms of the advice that you can give, and maybe that, you know, and for me, not very quickly, this happened for the players that are looking for the advice from you are at a much higher standard than you ever were. But there can be a little bit of imposter syndrome sometimes initially as you go through that period, and you can feel like the best players you've sometimes have worked with have been like they make you feel the most uncomfortable because they have an aura about them where like they're so keen to perform and get better. It's working with them and around them isn't always the most comfortable environment, if that makes sense.
Oh no, I mean, totally, yeah.
And
it's
the piece I wanted to ask you is, how do you deal with that, like in terms of, because obviously you have a set of values and a set of principles that you like to work by, and do you ever find sometimes that those values you might want, like, compromise them, and when do you choose to go into that conflict space? Well, I believe, you know, this is the way we should go about our business, etc., etc.
I mean, that in a conversation is weighted differently depending on where you are, who you're with, at what stage, during a tournament, away from a tournament. You know, there's always that inner dialogue, isn't there, about, you know, how you should be behaving. And that's like, that's one of the difficult things about coaching, isn't it? I think coaching, not just about the information that you have or the knowledge. I mean, I know loads of people that are really knowledgeable in terms of the information that they have related to golf performance, but they might not be the best coaches. So, you know, what makes up a really good coach? I think, like, you've got interpersonal skills, communication skills, the ability to be able to still do the job and say the right things at the right time, even though you're shitting yourself more than the player is, stuff like that. So, and I don't know, I don't have like a formula for that, or could even pass on advice. You just do it, don't you? And sometimes you really screw up doing it, and other times you get lucky. I think it just becomes like an intuitive sense. It's experience, isn't it? One bit of advice I would give to any coach, particularly now with the amount of information that we have, you know, I mean, you can go on Instagram every day at the moment and do an Insta live, watch that, watch a Zoom, this podcast, this, whatever. And there's so much information. And even like golfers are talking about forces and torques and ground force reaction. And there's so much information out that there's a danger that people will get lost in professional knowledge and never develop any craft, skill and craft knowledge. So an experience, I think, is a big part of that. Like, I've given a shitload of putting lessons. When I first started, I was doing a lot of putting lessons, teaching whoever. I was lucky because Harold had a reputation. We had a studio. He was at a period in his career where he didn't really want to teach. So I was getting all those cast-offs, so you're doing 20 to 30 hours coaching a week just on one particular topic, which was putting. So there's a lot of, that was really good for me because I learned very quickly what worked and what didn't work. So it shaped my coaching a lot.
Yeah.
And that's experience, isn't it? So, and then I think I've been lucky to, have access to sort of people and knowledge, glean knowledge. I also went back and revisited a lot of the stuff I'd done academically and pieced together that knowledge with some practical insight. So, that's a large part of coaching, I think, experience.
It's funny, even when you say that, it reminds me of the Beatles, obviously from Liverpool, but when they started out, they had to go to Stuttgart in Germany, and they did something like nearly 2 years where they played together every single night non-stop.
Yeah.
And that, you can't beat that, really, that time. You can't watch enough YouTube videos or Instagram lives to replace that experience of.
Oh no, you can't. And a lot of coaching is decision making. So you could have all that knowledge, but you never put yourself into a position of when you're going to decide to do that or that, then you're not going to develop your skill as a coach, are you? So I think experience is massive, really. And I think going back to your original question before about dealing with people and stuff, I think if you're dealing with different personalities or different levels of golfer, you talk about imposter sort of syndrome, you get more comfortable being in that scenario by the more often you're in that scenario and something good comes from it. So, God, I know how I felt at certain times working with certain players, and you think shit, I'm about to work with player A here, and he's I used to watch him, win majors, and he's about to ask me his opinion. But I think, if you're comfortable in your skill set and you just focus on that, it's a bit like the player. Listen, focus on your own game, and if you'll be okay. You just focus on what you have to do, and you might come out of it okay. And then the more often that happens, the less nervous you might feel when player B comes along. and then you might do a little bit of a better job then. And it's momentum, isn't it? And you then grow as a coach. But
I think it's a tough, like that. It's the same, similar to you. I think I find that as well. Like your first couple of times, you're super nervous, and then like you just go in, you do a decent job, and then that goes well, and you start to become a little bit more comfortable with the uncomfortableness of it, I guess is how I'd say it.
Definitely, yeah.
And even in the different environments as well, like whether it's at a training week as opposed to a tournament, and when you say certain things and when you don't. And I think that's another thing that I would love to get your opinions on, because I know, in the past, they are very, like, well, certainly I found them to be quite different environments when you're with a player at a training camp or at a training week compared to a tournament. You can't. There's a difference even in the air. The fact players at a tournament are a different beast. They're like almost like racehorses at the racetrack. And when you're working with a player at a tournament compared to if it's on an off week or whatever, do you approach that situation differently? I know it's different for every player. Is it a refinement thing? Are you trying to get more of a sense of them? Are you comfortable just like not saying anything, standing back and let them go if they're in good nick? How do you handle that whole scenario?
Well, I mean, you're right in a sense that training weeks or when you're away from a tournament, it's very different than being at a tournament. And players have so much to do during a tournament week, and when they're there, they should be preparing to get ready and compete on a Sunday, not compete on a Thursday. So, you can't be sort of flogging the horse in practice days. It's literally preparing them. So, for me, at tournaments, it's, in an ideal world, you have the opportunity to work with a player away from the event. So you've got your plan, you know what that plan entails. And then you take that plan to a tournament and you help them put that plan into action, and you monitor that, and you see where, what could be happening, but you're always evaluating, well, is that going to inhibit his performance this week, or do we need to, push them in this direction or this direction? So it's, coaching at tournaments for me is as much observation at times than it is. I think people sometimes get the impression that, you're given a new lesson every day. And it's not really like that. I mean, I think particularly with putting, because, it's quite difficult at times for the player to appreciate the little nuances that could be occurring. You're there as like a mirror, a reflection for them, just for you, and, your responsibility is just to make sure, things are in place and that their mind's free just to go out and perform. And when you're away from tournaments, then is that the time that you can address the certain developmental things that you need to work on, because you keep seeing this popping up, and you want to try and minimise the effect of that. So but sometimes it's difficult because you don't always get that. You don't get that time away from tournaments. It can be such a busy schedule.
Yeah, big time.
And at times you do have to do work, and it's about finding the right time maybe to bring something up and say, listen, we need to address this. And that's like still a challenge for me, is to like work out when is the right thing to, to bring something up or tackle something. I'm sure I've messed up many times in the past, said the wrong thing at the wrong time. And I guess like somewhere in the back of here, you learn from that, and that's affecting your decision making moving forward. But I think that's the important thing to try and learn.
When you're doing that, because I've been in that situation myself, and like you're at a tournament and there's something you see and you're like, okay, if the performance is here right now, it's more likely to be here because of what I'm seeing than it is to be here. So I'm gonna make this suggestion. but it can be quite tough to determine where you have to like back end that suggestion with, well, here's how we're going to deal with that on the golf course, even though you know that this is going on, and maybe we still need you to be quite into your visual or whatever. How do you handle that? Like, at a tournament, do you bookend that with, here's where I want your head to be when you play? Do you allow does the player figure that out for themselves? What's your process around that when you're making a technical intervention, but you know that, okay, well, it's Tuesday and Wednesday, they still have to perform Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday?
Well, I think like a lot of the times with the players I'm working at, the caliber of the players, they've worked a lot of that stuff out, Right. I think some are obviously better than others at it.
Yeah.
But, I'm not going to, a lot of the times, I'm not going to be able to tell that player, listen, this is what you need to be doing if you're coming down the stretch and you've got this putt to win the Open. Because I've never had a putt to win the Open. But when you shit yourself on the first green, at the Masters, it's the first time you played in it. It's difficult at times, I think, personally, to be able to really tap into that without having that experience myself. But I mean, and I think a lot of players find these coping mechanisms, they work a lot of that stuff out for themselves. I guess, like, from my perspective, it's just trying to, whatever you're working on, it's just trying to make sure that they understand what they need to do and make sure it's processable. This week, if this is where we're at this week, this is what you need to do. And then they'll find a way at times, I think, to make it work. And then you've got to be there to bounce ideas back off them. If they're saying, listen, I'm struggling with this, right, can we do it this way? And, I think coaching is more about being a soundboard at times. I mean, some of the best players I work with, a lot of stuff they come up with it themselves, and you stop them from fucking themselves up. It's like, there's a couple of guys in particular who are so intuitive geniuses, work things out, and they'll talk to you about, I feel like if I can do this, I can then manage what we're trying to do. And you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense to me. And then they do it and it ticks all the boxes and you're like, right, okay. But at times they might say, well, what about this? And you say, well, no, I don't think that's going to help you. Let's find another solution. Yeah. But at times you kind of just helping them coach themselves.
Yeah.
But yeah, so the management of some of that stuff, I'll try and leave the player to do that, because I think sometimes they're a better judge of what they need to do than what I would be.
It's funny that sometimes it's used like they're intuitive geniuses, and sometimes like when you have to be aware, you have to be kind of careful what you make them aware of, because sometimes if you make them, this is in my experience, if you make them aware of something, they've got such a good sense of what everything feels like, altering that piece can become their overriding goal to the point where they perfect that, but then you'll actually see their performance dip. And that's, I suppose, like, the piece that I always want to try and work on a little bit is like, how can we improve, a piece and yet, keep this other piece okay as well.
So here's a scenario then for you, Donal. So you're at a tournament, a major, and you're having a discussion about where a player's sort of trending, and then you say to the player, well, that's kind of been in there the last few weeks. And his perception of where he is slightly different to where he's actually been. Then you bring it up, and then the player turns around to you and says, listen, don't ever be afraid of telling me where I'm at. I'd rather know exactly where I'm at any point in time than think I'm at somewhere else. Because when I'm on the golf course, if I know exactly where I'm at, then I know where I need to navigate towards. So you've got to tell me where I'm at. And if it gets out of place, tell me. So, with a player like that, it's the guidelines are clear, aren't they?
Mm.
But then that's not always the case, is it, with with some players, and you know that if you did tell them where they're actually at, they could perform way worse, because performance isn't linear. All these things don't need to be in place for guys to go play well, and someone could go out and perform brilliantly on that side of the curve.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge of coaching, really, is to work out each individual and what they need and what makes them tick. Or even with the player that says, I need to know where I'm at, you might think, well, what? Not this one.
Yeah. Do you really know?
Yeah. So, because that could be right before, the final few putts before he goes out, when he's leading a tournament.
Yeah.
And he might turn around to you and say, how's that look?
Yeah.
Shut again, but good luck. You're just not going to say it at that point in time, aren't you?
Yeah. And that's, I suppose, it is. And I know, like, we've spoken about it before, and like, no matter what you do in every single situation, there's a massive it depends in front of it, like, and it depends on the context, depends on the situation, depends on the person. And that's the art of it. But one of the other things I want to kind of go through, which was like, I'm always impressed by the fact that, like, there's so much going on with the players alone, but then obviously you have to work in your craft too, and you're quite passionate about that. It's like you're only as valuable to the player as you are, like, in relation to how much you improve what you do. And you're obviously quite creative because you've got your training aids, and then you've got your educational platforms and stuff like that. In addition to all your work on tour, where do you find those pockets of time to do the kind of reflection that allows you to come up with all the ideas that you execute on?
Don't know, really. I mean, I think, obviously I travel a lot, and when you're on a plane for 8-9 hours, you're actually periods of time, don't they? I mean, you just reflect. I don't know. You're continually critiquing yourself and reflecting upon things, don't you? Sometimes it's hard to get the time to action that.
Yeah.
So there's loads of things that I would like to be doing or get involved that I think would make me a better coach, but I don't have the time. So I remember, I spent a bit of time with Rob Neal, and Rob Neal would call it research and development, and a friend of mine, Mike Walker, he called it R&D. It's, you've got it, and Rob himself at times has said, he's had periods when we had this conversation in particular, he said, he's not had enough time for his own R&D. He's caught up in the business side of things.
Yeah.
So, and I would say, like, I don't have enough time for R&D, which is actually right. If you've had these reflections, or you've had, thoughts of, like just trying to work stuff out, or ways that you think you could be better, the difficulty is having the time to actually put that into action, But I would definitely like more R&D time. But it's hard to be able to then sacrifice the business aspect of that.
Yeah.
I think that's where, when I was going about, like, the wheel, that's where you kind of get caught up in that. I mean, this period of lockdown has been sort of quite good for that. It's given me, I've done a load of stuff which I would never have had the time to do. I mean, my missus is sort of pulling my leg, saying that we don't see you, like, or when we've had friends on calls and stuff. Oh, we don't see him. He locks himself away, which I hope's not true. I hope she's joking. It's been one of the personal things for me in this lockdown has actually been family time.
Yeah.
But I have tried to make use of my time and do a few things which I would not have done otherwise. So, which I've enjoyed. It's been a nice sort of change of scenery. But no, I would like more time, definitely, to action some of the self-reflection and that. But yeah, no, I always have I carry a little pad with me, and my notes section on my phone, if I can't get to my pad, I'll just like jot things down in there and stuff, and sometimes I'll go back and look at that 2 weeks later and think, what the heck was that I was writing?
I've got my notebooks up there, and I have this like fear of looking back a couple of years ago, because I'm so worried that I'll read it and go, you fucking, like, what kind of client are you? What were you thinking back then?
No. Yeah. Well, I can't understand what I wrote 2 weeks ago.
In the reflection piece of when you're going back over it, I think sometimes one thing I wonder is, like, the 80-20 rule is like, is 20% of the coaching that I do delivering 80% of the results, and then is 80% of it, I'm just there, but I'm not really necessarily having a massive impact on a performance. But like you said, a lot of the time you don't know when you're going to have those, like, really important, like, come to God conversations that can really have a good effect on the performance of things. And then it can be quite tough to know what amount you need to cut off to give yourself that time to execute on your ideas, if you get me. And that, I suppose, you've had this time to reflect. When you go back, do you think you'll go back to doing exactly what you did, or will you recognize the fact that maybe if you actually took 30% of the actual coaching away and you had that 30% of time back to work in your ideas, the 70% could be much, much better as a result? Or how do you think you'll go back into it?
I don't really know yet. I don't think I've consciously worked that out. I know, like, I get what you're saying about, like, if you looked at contact time and the 2018 stuff, and I would agree, like, you get, but sometimes you have to be there and wait just for that coachable moment. I always remember, like, when I started doing some England golf stuff with Graham Walker, and I hadn't done a load of sort of group type, national level coaching at the time. Being around, like, good players, but it would be more one-on-one. So you kind of walking around a golf course, watching kids play, and you think, oh, what am I doing here? It could be stacking lessons somewhere. And got talking with Graham, and it always resonated with me. And he talked about sometimes you just got to wait for that coachable moment, And he said, in particular, he related it to, like, the kids that, they don't know you. They've got their own coaches. Just being around them, forming a relationship with them, and at some point they might ask you a question or something happens, and that's your moment where you can coach. And I think even, like, if you travel a lot to tournaments, there'd be a lot of time. And I could even look back at tournaments and think, well, how much coaching have I actually done? It's more observation and setting up performance drills, or doing, setting stuff up, but you're observing and you're taking stuff in, and you're getting to know that player, you're getting to understand their behaviour, what drives them, the nuances of the performance, and to a point where you can, when something comes up, you're better suited to be able to say, right, this is what we need to do, this is how we address this problem. So, like, that 80% often serves for you to really be good at that 20%.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know. Like, you have to be there for that period of time to get those pockets of space where you can really, have an influence.
Yeah. From, like, just being around the player and stuff like that, and you could be doing certain coaching or certain stuff that might not be truly effective or whatever, but it's being in that, allows you to actually produce those nuggets that will really help.
I know one of the big takeaways I've gotten away from, it was actually chatting to a friend of mine who's involved with the Irish rugby team, and he spoke about they got a pilot in to talk to them about how they do their simulations, so, and one of the things that they do in the simulators is they actually put smoke into the cockpit. So as they're doing, like, there's actual smoke in there to try and, make the simulation as realistic as possible. And you just said there about setting up performance games and doing your observational piece. You're in a kind of a, like, it's a good position where you're that popular, but you've got a lot, like, you've got quite a number of players at each event. And I suppose bar watching them hit, like maybe some of the putts you see on television and stuff like that, I presume, and I could be wrong, you don't get a huge amount of time in context where you're actually on the golf course watching them putt. So do you find it important that you actually like put the smoke in the cockpit on the putting green to see what breaks down under performance, or how do you go about that piece? Because as we know, like, movement isn't always the same depending on the situation that the player's in.
I think, one thing that you can do in putting, which is a little bit harder in a full swing, is you can get close to recreating the environment. So you can recreate like more the shot types that you're going to face and things like that. So, you can see how players tend to respond in terms of how they might try and manage their pattern on certain putt types, things. Obviously when the gun goes, the nervous system changes, things can change. But I think like for the most part, in terms of like the patterns and dispersions, will tend to be reflective out on the golf course. So like for me, like I think performance practice is a big part of what I like to see, because it not only are you able to put things into some sort of context from like a skill acquisition point of view, so they can transfer these behaviors to a golf course, but it also gives you a chance to like look at patterns, see what players are doing, observe, well, this is how he's adapting to that putt, this is his issue on, when he hits that putt, this is obviously what's happening. So that part of practice is, really, really important for not just for the player, but for me
as well. And
I think when it's very difficult to see stuff from outside of the ropes, putting wise.
Yeah.
You can look at behaviours, you can look at sort of routines, you can kind of get a gauge of misses at times, but even that can be difficult.
Yeah.
Unless, pro-ams are probably the best, because you can get on the course with the player. But then sometimes there's just not enough intensity there either from a player's part.
Big time.
So, personally, I'd love to caddy for a player. I'd love to have the opportunity, just at a good tournament with, players I work with, to have that opportunity to caddy for it. It'd never happen. But it'd be really interesting to get on the green and actually really sort of see what's happening and get a clearer picture and stuff.
When you do the performance work, in terms of the players, because the sequence of things in terms of like, well, if you're going to really replicate it, like in a tournament, they'll have to mark the ball, put the ball back down, and do you try and keep the sequence of what it will be like in tournament as similar as possible? Is the intensity at which they want to execute their routine, does that differ from player to player when you're doing the performance games at tournaments? Like, how do those play out with the different players that you have, if you get me?
Yeah, well, I don't think you can ever truly recreate. You can't recreate performance you can't truly recreate the environment in performance stuff. I don't know, you just can't do it, I don't think. And I think other players, I've got players who do it with real intensity and probably don't do as well as the players who do it with less intensity. So I've not worked that one out yet. And, I think there's some evidence as well about like performance stuff, with real like high level performers as to how engaged that they can be with sort of, performance drills and stuff. I don't know. I think how I really use them more is to create variability in practice, for one, to put it into context to help me learn about the player's patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it can help intensity with a player, can't it? And having some intensity is better than having none. But I wouldn't say I'd go as far as like I'd beat every player to the point where they've got to be, replicate exactly what they do on the golf course. Yeah. I don't necessarily see players doing that. See the best players doing that anyway. So I need to maybe understand that a little bit more from, the science behind that. I don't know. But like, have you watched Tiger practice?
Yeah.
What would you observe about how he goes about his practice?
The biggest thing, I hadn't seen Tiger since I was a kid, really. Not really, I somewhat high like, but I stayed on for an extra couple of days after the women's amateur at Augusta last year, and the only reason was to watch Tiger practice. And when I watch the stuff on YouTube and stuff, the biggest thing that stands out to me isn't so much what he does, but it's the rhythm at which he does the things that he does. He seems to like be in his own space a lot, if you get me. Like everything seems in flow, like even like the way he moves around, everything. And he doesn't look intense. He looks like he's exploring quite a bit, I would say. It looks like he's not so much that he's like really, how would I say, focusing very hard, but he's kind of like, he's really getting a lot of feedback from whatever the ball is doing, I would say. That's what I took from it. And I suppose one of the biggest things I took from it was, well, this is more on his long shots, but every single shot he hit on the range, he watched the ball the whole way down. It was like he was trying to learn as much as he could from each individual outcome from each shot.
Yeah.
That's what I took.
Yeah, so a lot of those things that you've said there are your perception of what, I mean, the last thing that you said where you watched it could be more maybe objective, but like I would say, like, I see a lot of block practice with Tiger. I wouldn't say I'd see many performance drills or him putting like loads of context into his practice. But like, if you ever wanted anyone to pull off a shot, like he'd be the guy, wouldn't he? So I get this sort of challenge in my own head at times, like how much the practice really needs to recreate performance or recreate that environment. I think there needs to be an element of that. But some of the best players in the world don't do that.
Yes.
Now, could they be better if they did? I don't know. I don't know. It's interesting, isn't it? It's an interesting topic.
The one with Tiger and the fact that he doesn't do that, and I think he seems to get, well, again, it's very subjective from my point of view, but his visuals seem to be really strong. Like I remember at 18 at Augusta, I think like maybe it was a week or two later, Henny Zula was interviewing him, and she was on about, and she kind of goes like, she goes, "Oh, so Tiger," this is my English accent, by the way, Phil, so you're going to have to get me right. She goes, "So Tiger, you've got 15 foot downhill, what were you thinking?" And he's like, "Well, I knew it was going to be a little bit downhill. I knew it was a little bit left to right. And
it was really tough.
It was really, really tough." He's like, and I could see how I was going to break. And it actually just straightened up a little bit more than I thought. And it ran out to like 2.5 feet. And you could see Henny, she's kind of like, "No, Tiger, I mean, like, were you not thinking, like, oh my God, this is for my 15th major or whatever?"
Yeah.
And he was like, "Did you not know this?" He was like, "Oh, well, I knew, like, he's like, "Oh, yeah, I knew Brooksy had finished whatever. But it was like, when she asked him what was he thinking, he had this crystal clear visual of exactly what he wanted the putt to do. Yeah. And then not only that, but exactly how the putt differed to what he saw. Yeah. And that, maybe that's what he gets from practice, or maybe that's what makes him special, or do you see that as a common trend in the players that?
Oh, that wouldn't surprise me that he said, I didn't see the interview, but it wouldn't surprise me, because I think in that moment, that's where that player is, and that's why they're doing well in that tournament, and they pull it off because they're in that moment, and then when they get taken back to that, they'll recall that. But like, I just think it's interesting. Like, success leaves clues, doesn't it?
100%, yeah.
And there's a lot of science, which is good, And listen, I'm 45 now. When I went to uni 24 years ago. A long time. My undergrad and postgrad was in skill acquisition. So, 24 years ago, people were talking about dynamical systems and ecological approach to skill acquisition and stuff like that. So it's been around, it's filtering through into golf coaching, and there's a lot of really good info. But there's also some really good, you're talking like professional and craft knowledge. We're going back to sort of like, you know, what's the craft knowledge that players have learned? Well, this works, you know, the professional knowledge through our understanding of motor control, skill acquisition, that brings an element, but also let's look at, you know, what good players do, you know, and there's be a reason for it. I always remember when I did my MSc was in sports psychology, and in particular, my thesis was skill acquisition, and I interviewed golf coaches about their model and coaching, and it was like a content analysis, that in-depth interviews, and drew out themes and tried to relate them to contemporary coaches, contemporary theories of skill acquisition, which was more like dynamical systems, ecological approach, to traditional cognitive theories of, you know, motor controls, skill acquisition. And none of these coaches had probably ever been exposed to the literature at all. You know, you're talking, you know, some good coaches at the time. And all of them displayed attributes which could be assigned to both theories. So it's like they took the best out of both theories and did them, and all successful coaches in their own right. So sometimes, like, you can look at players and think, well, he doesn't do that right. If he did it this way, it'd be better. Well, actually, why does he do that? You know, what's the reason he would do that? Another example, going off on a tangent here now. So
brilliant, yeah, keep going.
You know, Masters, all putts break to Rae's Creek. Yardage book has Rae's Creek on. Why do people say that? Why over however many decades do the caddies believe that's the case? Why is Rae's Creek important? Rather than dismiss it, because you and I both know that, you know, landmarks don't create break, why not try and understand why be the case? And I think if you look into that, you probably understand the nuances of why that piece of information could help the caddy. Okay, and it'd be like looking at Tiger or some of the other players, how they practice and the block practice, or maybe not doing performance drills. What is it that's giving them the edge? Well, why does it help them when it might not help another player? So, like, I found the players I work with that some will be way more into the performance stuff, and it really ticks their box for them, and others less so. You know, they'll tick a box and get engaged in another way. But you have to, you know, a little bit will help them. So you try and push them, but then also you can also feel some pushback. But the bottom line is, can you go out and perform? You know, if you go out and perform and you can do that, then you can always ask yourself, will you perform better? But also, like, are you going to go and perform any worse? You know, if all of a sudden you change how you practice to meet some theoretical model, you know, you might actually go and perform worse.
It's funny you say that. It's like, that's one of the things I've learned, is that, especially with good players, is that 99% of what they do, there's a good reason behind why they're doing it. It's serving some function, and I think sometimes it can be our job to figure out what that function is. Like, whether that's a movement or whatever, like, it's there for a reason. There's, you know, it's certain. I think that's one of the things that I've tried to work on, is the better I feel like I can understand everything that they do, what function it provides, the better you can assess whether improving it, changing it, making you know, doing something different is actually going to make the boat go faster ultimately anyway. And I think the same can be said for behaviors too. Is like, I always try and think that everybody is doing their best. Nobody's purposely doing worse than their best. Like, they're just doing the best with whatever skill set, mindset they have on that particular day. And I think that's where, when it comes to the behavior piece, like the different types of practices and stuff, that's the, you know, as things stand right now at this moment in time, that's what they feel will provide them with the best chance of doing whatever they need to do in that particular week. I suppose the challenge is, and that's like the beauty of the coaching piece, is like when it does stops working, or they decide that it's not working to the standard that they want it to work at, it's which piece you go after.
Yeah, I like that.
So, one final one for you, Phil, before I let you head off into the night there and go back over the 1990 Anfield album that you keep. I know right well you're telling your wife that you're in there researching golf and you're just going back over the glory days. Or maybe
if she knew that I was talking to a United fan, she'd castrate me. She's a big Liverpool fan.
Oh, is she? Yeah?
Yeah. I have to sleep under a poster of Steven Gerrard.
Could be worse. It could have been John Aldridge. So.
Oh, I love a bit of Aldo.
What in the future of, like, sometimes as we look to the future, we go back to the past, or maybe and do you see any paradigm shifts coming in golf performance or golf coaching or anything over the coming years? Like what has your experience today taught you about what you think will happen coming down the line?
I think it's getting more specialised, isn't it? So I think, even within specialist areas, you got specialists, So I think I think at an elite level, it would become more of groups of coaches working together. I think, like golf coach working alongside biomechanist, in development of the player, not just like the golf coach doing it on their own. Working alongside the strength and conditioning guy. I mean, you get that. I just see it like getting even closer. I mean, I've been on a chat this afternoon with Mark Bull about a player, and we're going through his 3D data, and I've got some absolute nuggets from Mark about certain things, and he understands how that could like relate to some outcomes, and it's like we're both better off after that conversation, me more than Mark. But so I think like things like that, collaborations, I see it being more like collaborations, because as like coaching, there's so many skill sets, I think, to coaching. It's hard to be an expert at everything, isn't it?
Oh,
like,
big time, yeah.
How do you, like, the anatomy, it's so complex, isn't it? And then you've got like all the forces and torques and biomechanics and Jesus, like, so, but if you, as a coach, if you can understand all the different components and then be able to tap into, the biomechanist or this psychologist and bring it together. So I see sort of coaching's got to be a bit more diverse in that way, and you've got to bring in people to help you, but then you've got to be able to deliver it in the playable, right, this is what you've got to go out and do. Think of your left toe, count to 3, hit it. Whatever it is, you put it in a playable manner, or you structure the practice for them, but you take all that complex information and try and make the player improve as a consequence of it.
I think that's going to be one of the big things. I think that's going to come from this lockdown period, is that I think all of us involved in the game right now have had the opportunity. I know I've had to like have so many nice conversations and reach out to people that I value their opinion on. And there's like a massive almost groupthink going on because we have the time to do it. And I think that the players will be of the big benefactors down the line, hopefully, about, when we get back to playing again. Do you know what I mean? It's like when the likes of you and Mark Bull and David Orr and everybody that's involved have the time to share ideas and talk that bit more. I hope that, all that can only be a benefit, I guess. You know what I mean? When we're in
we might just confuse the fuck out of more people.
Yeah, there's always that chance. Phil, thanks a million.
Here we go. Here's one last. I wanted to ask you this question, but if the industry of golf took away all the coaches, okay, would the best players still be the best players?
As we know them right now, or the ones in the future?
Both.
I think in some cases, absolutely. I think in some cases, maybe not. I think some players are a lot more reliant on their team than others, and I think some players are a lot more self-orientated and would be 100% fine. I think you'd probably have. So yeah, I hate to say it, but I think the very best would probably be okay. But maybe some of the middle of the pack guys could shift up or down dependent. So that would be my thoughts on it. I think.
So in short, then it depends.
Yeah. Yeah, that's my opinion. I think I think it depends. But I do think that and I know I've gotten in that. I think sometimes we can overestimate the impact that we have as coaches, and it can work two ways, because I think sometimes like you can overestimate it, and you're so worried about making a comment or making a change because you think it'll be detrimental to performance. I remember, actually, funny, one of the things, I remember texting you one time because I wasn't sure about making a change. I was like, fuck, will I do it, will I not? And you said, and it was brilliant, and I'll never forget it, you like, look, just do it. If it either work or it doesn't.
Yeah.
Stop overthinking it. Just fucking make the suggestion, it'll either work or it doesn't. And it really freed me up, because it's like, yeah, what am I worried about? Just do it. And if it works, it works. If it doesn't.
Yeah, should maybe take my own advice at times. Because sometimes it's easier when you're out of the. So I might have said that. I can't remember saying that, but
yeah,
sometimes I probably need to take my own advice.
It was brilliant. Phil, thanks a million, and as always,
No
I
problem.
appreciate you.
Nice to catch up with you, Donal.
All right, dude.
Yeah, take care, mate.
See you,
all right.
Bye.
Bye.